Remember that one? I find it really fascinating when I do this, and I bring up ones that are from the days of my misspent youth, and I look around and I see the smiles on the members of the congregation, and I know where you folks were 30, 40 years ago. You were hanging out in the same hippie haunts I was. But if I could pick, now you do know who sings and wrote that song, right? Do you know the name? Johnny Mitchell. But do you know who would have written it if he could have? Paul the Apostle. That's the scripture that we just heard read. If you stop and think about what Paul was saying and what Joni Mitchell is saying, they're not that far apart. It's hard to believe that Paul the Apostle was the original hippie, but he was named Saul, and he did travel around the countryside living out of tents. Sound familiar? Not sure how long his hair was, or whether he wore beads. But he does say in that scripture today that he doesn't get caught up in all the moral, religious instruction of his faith when he goes out amongst the people, that he does go out to the people and meet them where they're at. And what I remember about my misspent youth was being angry at the establishment for boxing people into categories, stratification of society, the levels of middle class, lower class, upper class, and all the things that we tried to tear down and try to change because we felt that people were being lost. And we talked about love and freedom and peace. And in this song, she talks about taking and looking at life from both sides. We forget to do that. Even now, years later, we listen to the song. It brings a smile to our lips and to our hearts, and we remember what we think is a kinder, gentler age. Although at the day that it was happening, we didn't see it that way. We saw ourselves as part of a movement to bring true peace to the world that was not kinder and gentler, but had rolled over on people and hurt them. And Paul talks about going out amongst the people and meeting the Gentiles where they are at. That he lives amongst the Gentiles and he lives by their way of life. And that when he's with the different groups, he talks about that's where he meets them. And if you think about what our gospel is about, our gospel is about meeting people where God finds them, not where we think they should be. Sadly enough, though, our faith became ritualized. From the day of a young carpenter from Nazareth and a young tent maker from Tarsus, from the days of that early movement in faith to reform and reshape, not make a new one, but to reform and reshape the Hebrew faith. And the people of God, a movement to say, look at people. Look at them where they're at. Meet them where you find them. And dare share what we know to be a profound truth. A new way of being, a new way of living, a gentler, kinder way of coexisting within God's creation. But we don't do that. Our faith became a systems and series of rules. And while the young carpenter and the young tent maker were railing against the 648 tenets of the Hebrew faith that you could not possibly keep without. It's impossible to keep all of the commandments and the rules that have come from them. I don't mean the 10 commandments, I mean the tenets of the Hebrew faith, 648. It had become impossible to keep them, so that you could only live under the judgment of guilt. We want to change that. But look at the story of our own faith. From those early days in the Middle East, to its Western incarnations, to its North American reality for us today. It became a rigid set of rules. How many people here grew up with you don't dance on Sunday, or dancing is wrong altogether? Right? Find me that one in the Bible. Don't play cards. Right? Don't eat meat on Fridays. Think about it. What did we do with it? We just started making people guilty with it. We just started the I and thou thing all over again. I'm better than thou art. I'm more moral than you are. We could burn witches. We could name people as dark friends. And we could moralize about them. We could talk about the people who live on the other side of the tracks and make their living in unclean ways. And we stopped seeing people for who they really are. And we stopped having a heart of kindness. And all down through these years, whether it's those of us, the children of the 60s, or the New Age revivalists, or whomever it is you want to talk about, there's always been those movements to try and bring us back to what God was trying to show us in the gospel. Jesus wandered the countryside, and he did not walk up to people's doors, knock on the door and say, I'm here doing a survey from the church. Now, are you eating meat on Fridays? Are you keeping the Sabbath and keeping it holy? Are you, and if you are, then it's okay, I can talk with you. No, he walked into the local Tim Hortons or eucalyptus tree, whatever you want to call it. Sat down wherever he met them, and broke bread, shared water. Gathered in those places of shade where people would gather in the midday sun, and sat with them and laughed and told stories and met them where they were at. Traveled with great groups of people and cared about whether they were fed or not. Didn't say, those people should have brought their own stuff. He gave us a new way of seeing. We have eyes, and we fail to use them. Because we don't connect them to that other source of vision that really makes the eyes work. Some people's eyes don't work, but their other sources of vision work, and they have truer sight than those of us with ocular ability. Because looking with your eyes isn't enough. You have to look with your heart. And you have to look with your soul. And you have to look into the face of a stranger and see a friend. See a companion. You have to look into the face of someone of another faith and see someone who still is a child of God. You have to look across lines of economy and race and nationality, and even whether or not you like them. I'm not saying that Jesus liked everyone he met. He certainly had some stern words for a few. But he didn't throw them away. And he didn't discredit them or discount them. Joni Mitchell in the song actually says words like, but now old friends are acting strange. They shake their heads, they say I've changed. Well, something's lost, but something's gained in living every day. How many of us look back at old friends and say, oh, they changed, I don't understand them anymore. I can't relate to them. And we make a judgment and we walk away. It's easy to do, make that judgment and walk away. We do it all the time. We do it in the snap of a moment, in the grocery store lineup, walking into a bank, going to our places of employment and work. We'll meet people, take a look, real quick, judge, condemn, and walk away. Or we'll see people who we've known for years enter into some sort of experience or set of behaviors, and we will make a judgment saying, oh, they've changed. That's wrong. I had a woman one time who was excessively critical of everyone in her sphere of influence. I mean, prickly isn't the word you'd use for this woman. On a good day when she was being as gentle as she could be, she was prickly. She was a local personage of some note in the community in which I lived. And she had all the bristle you could get. Like she's just a force to be reckoned with. And she had people judging her from every side you could judge some people. Some people respected her for her power and influence, and other people just stayed away. Judged her to be harsh and uncaring. She became quite ill and was in hospital, and I had to be the one who faced the prickle in its den. And I sat by her bedside, and I heard a story that would it still does, makes my heart weep for the pain and sorrow that had been in her life prior to my meeting her, prior to most of the people who knew her meeting her. Because she had come to this community to rebuild out of an excessively broken life. And I discovered what was prickly was really a very complex set of defenses designed to keep her from ever being hurt again. Paul says, you meet people where they're at. You meet them with the set of standards by which they are living. You accept them where they are, and you come to know them. And then you can share the good news. Then you can share the good news. But first, you meet them where they're at. My father used to say, you got to walk a mile in someone's shoes. That's the same thing. And if you've ever put on some people's shoes, they really hurt. And I'll tell you, I'm not doing 3-inch spikes ever again. There's an image you didn't want, right? But it's true. You think about what people put up with and what they suffer and what they do. And it becomes very easy to judge until we stop and stay with them a while. When I first moved to Ontario, or back to Ontario, I guess the easiest way to put it, I had left here when I was finished high school and spent back to my home place of birthplace of Nova Scotia for so many years. And I'd moved back here in 1997. And I'd been here not quite a year, but I'd been through the winter. And my younger brother came to visit. And my younger brother lives in Halifax. And he has worked for the last 25 years or so with the First Nations peoples. And one of his compatriots in his work, a young chief of the Mi'kmaq people, was with him. And I've known John. John sadly passed away a few years ago, but I've known John for years. A very gentle man. Well educated, come up out of the dirt of the Eskasoni Reserve. Literally lived in a house with dirt floors growing up. Was a young lawyer in the Maritimes. Had gone to work for his people, and he stood in my back of my church. Great big bear of a man, and he was wearing like actually a doeskin jacket and sort of a lumberjack shirt and some jeans. And he took my hand and he said, "You have wintered well with these people?" And I said, yes, John, I have wintered well with these people. Because in his culture, you didn't get to know somebody. You don't even pretend that you think you know somebody until you've wintered with them. You've gone through the long, dark nights and the dim days and shared the longhouse and broken bread together and lived with them, and then you can say you know them. But how many of us meet somebody in passing at a party, and you'll hear somebody mention them to you someplace else down the road, and you say, oh yes, I know them. Right? We've had a flashing acquaintance. What Paul and Jesus are talking about is not the flashing acquaintance of life. It's getting to know somebody, looking at their life, understanding them for who they really are, and yourself for who you really are. Looking at life from both sides and seeing beyond all those illusions and coming to know a child of God. And I have only one question to close this with.